All right, now I want to move into the sermon here today. You may have heard this saying. It's really the title of the sermon, but you may have heard the saying, burn the ships. Burn the ships. And if you haven't heard, let me explain. Burning the ships alludes to certain famous incidents where a commander, having landed in a hostile country, ordered the men in his army to destroy their ships so that they would have to conquer the country or be killed. And there are a number of incidents in history where we see this kind of thing happening. You may have heard the phrase, burn your bridges. That expression is derived from burning down a bridge after you cross it on a military campaign, which leaves you no choice but to continue into the battle or die. There's no way to escape. You just burned your escape rope behind you. And figuratively, it means to commit to a particular course of action, making an alternative course of action impossible. And I think you can begin to understand how this might apply to us spiritually speaking. Once they burned the ships, it was either get in the fight or die. There was no alternative. You've just cut off your escape route. And the same is true for us. Once we've committed to following Christ, we got to commit to the fight. We've got to get in the fight. We got to get in the battle. And what kind of battle are we fighting? Go to Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6. Verse 12 and 13. It says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the day of evil, and having done all, to stand." Now, I have two sons that are wrestlers. They wrestled in junior high, and they wrestled all through high school. Of course, they were in the church, so they couldn't wrestle on the Sabbath. So you had weekend tournaments on a regular basis, and they weren't able to wrestle, from sundown Friday until sundown Saturday. And so they could never make the state championship. They wrestled state champion wrestlers, but you can't accrue enough points unless you're wrestling in enough tournaments to get to that level. But as they would wrestle, they learned some really good lessons. And one of the lessons you learn as a wrestler, and some of you have been wrestlers or maybe are wrestlers, and I know there are some young people in the church that are wrestlers, you understand that once you get on the mat, you're totally committed to that match. Because if you're not, you're going to be pinned in a short amount of time. And once you commit to that match, you're in the fight. There's no getting out of it unless you get pinned or you pin the other guy. You made a commitment. And once you are in a wrestling match and you make a move, if any of you have wrestled, you understand, okay, I'm going to slip a half Nelson here. Once you commit to the move, you can't stop halfway through. You got to commit to the move. You got to go all in. Now, sometimes you'll fake one way and go another, but once you commit, you got to go all in. And if you're committing to a defensive move, you can't do it halfway or you will get pinned. You will lose the match. You got to be, again, in the fight. You got your head in the game. You're committing to it. We see an example in Genesis 32, beginning in verse 24. I'm not going to go there right now, where Jacob got in a wrestling match, and he actually got in a wrestling match with God, the one we know as Jesus Christ. And we see that in that match, he had his hip put out of the socket, and he would not stop. He would not quit. He was all in. He was in the fight, and he's like, I'm not letting you go, and I ain't quitting. I'm not giving up until you bless me. And he had his name changed from Jacob to Israel, prevailer with God. Wow, that's a nice title. But once he committed to the battle, he wasn't quitting. He popped my hip out. I know that hurt. If you've ever dislocated anything, that's pretty painful. That hurts. But Jacob wasn't a quitter, and we can't be. Go to Luke 9:62. Luke 9:62. The last verse in this chapter. And we often read this when we're counseling people for baptism. And here at the end of the chapter, Jesus said to him, "No one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." So as a Christian, God says, look, I want you to be totally committed to this way of life and to me. And I want you to be all in, no matter what it costs you. I have to come first in your life, God says. And once you commit to this, once you make this decision to follow me, there should be nothing, there should be no one, there's not a thing on the planet that can stop you from attaining that goal. Because if you quit, if you look back, if you drop out, God says you're not fit for the kingdom. I can't use you. Quitters won't be in the kingdom of God. And sometimes the test is easy for us, but we all get tested. Sometimes those tests are larger. You know, you might get cancer. That's a bigger test. It might be that your job gets taken away because you're not going to work on the Sabbath. You know, it's holy time. And you go, look, no, I can't work on the Sabbath. Not even once in a while. I'm not going to compromise. And I'm sorry, but if that's a deal breaker, then I guess I don't work here. I'll have to go find another job because I'm not compromising. And I think we all need to get in that mindset when it comes to God and his way of life, that he comes first and that we're not going to compromise. And, you know, I talked about wrestling. Jake, when he graduated, we had a big wrestling banquet. There's 160 some people in the room, and he was one of the speakers at the banquet. And he got an opportunity to thank his coach and teammates for letting him wrestle on the team, even though he kept the Sabbath. And, you know, you all know I keep, you know, the Sabbath, and I don't wrestle from sundown to sundown, but I appreciate you letting me be on the team and train with you and get in all the matches I could. And then his coach got up, gave a speech, and the coach got a little choked up and said, look, we threw you to the wolves. You know it. We often had you wrestle 2 and 3 weight categories above your weight, just so we could win points for a team. The team would win the match, because you were never pinned in your entire high school career. Nobody could ever pin you. And so I could wrestle you up against tougher, heavier guys, but nobody could pin you. And I knew that would save us points. Even if you lost the match, it wasn't a pin. That'd be more, you know, fall is more points for the other team. And we appreciate what you did for us. But that's the way we have to think as Christians. That's a small example. It's just a sport. There are bigger things in life than sports. And again, it can be your job, which might be, you know, a big deal. You got to pay the rent, and you have to put it on the line and say, no, I'm going to go keep the Feast of Tabernacles. I know I got this great job, and if I go do this, you're telling me I don't have a job when I get back, but I have to do it. I'm totally committed to that, and that's why it's good in the interview when you're taking the job to say, look, by the way, I don't work on Sabbath from sundown to sundown, Friday night to Saturday night. And I have some holy days during the year that I'm not going to be able to miss. You know, God says I have to be there. That's where I'm going to be. And I'm not going to compromise with that. You know, I look at my life. I don't do weddings on the Sabbath. I don't do funerals on the Sabbath. Never have, never will. It's holy time. They've got 6 days to do that. And I've had to decline several funerals, even in the church, because they were on the Sabbath. I go, what did they do with Christ on the Sabbath? They didn't touch that body. They knew better on the high day and the weekly Sabbath. I don't do weddings on the Sabbath. I remember I was in my 40s, and I had counted 48 weddings. I kept a tally that I had missed that were Sabbath weddings. That was 48 Sabbaths I would have went to weddings on. I wasn't even 40 yet. I'm 58 now, a lot more. I finally just said, what am I even counting this for? It just proves my point. If I compromise once, my next relative's going to say, you went to that one, why aren't you at ours? And I come from large families. And I just decided early on, that's not something I'm going to do. This is holy time. This is God's time. I can be there after sundown. I can be there before sundown, but I'm going to keep the Sabbath holy. And I'm not going to compromise on that. And I think we all need to think more like that. Be careful, God says, to observe my laws. You know, I just think that we're in a time at the end of an age where Satan is going to do all he can to get us to stumble and fall, to quit, to look back, to compromise. And I mentioned, you know, God says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, and so much the more as you see the day approaching in Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. That's in there for a reason. So we got to assemble, and we got to find a way to assemble, and we don't ever stop assembling. If God tells me that he loves it when I sing praises to him, then I'm going to sing praises to him. Whether I'm in prison, whether I'm in this room, doesn't matter. When we're having a holy convocation, when we come before God, we're going to do the right thing. No exceptions, no bailout clauses, no, for the time being, I don't have to do this. In this time of distress, whatever that is, when things get hard, you dig deeper. You don't compromise. You don't do the wrong thing because now it's hard to do the right thing. You have to be totally committed to this. And God says, look, if you're not going to make it. So get in the fight. And it's a battle. I mean, it's Satan, it's demons, it's society. It's a hard battle. And God says, get ready for it, because here it comes. Luke 14, let's go a little bit further here in Luke. Luke 14:26 gives us another important piece of information. It says in verse 26, if anyone comes to me, Christ said, and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now, what does it mean to hate? Well, to hate here is rhetorical, because we have other scriptures and we let the Bible interpret itself, and God says, honor your parents, and you should love one another. And we're taught not to hate, our father and our mother. And so what does it mean? If you look at the original words, it refers to desiring something less than something else. In other words, God has to have first priority in our life. He has to come before father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and even your own life. God says, I come first. And you have to be all in. And then if you read the verses after that, he talks about counting the cost. If you're going to go to battle and you got 10,000 troops and you're facing the guy with 20, are you prepared to take them on? Or do you desire conditions of peace? If you begin to build a building and you don't have enough to finish it, people are going to laugh at you and go, this guy began to build, he couldn't finish. He didn't plan very well. That was foolish. Count the cost, God says. So when people are counseling for baptism, we say, look, have you counted the cost? Are you all in? Are you totally committed? There's no turning back here. Like when you're in this fight, you don't get, it's like a real fight, right? I think of the old days, and they're fighting there with swords and bows and spears, and they didn't have all the weapons of modern technology. And you got in the heat of the battle, and you got a bad injury. You got so hit with a sword. You didn't get to call timeout. I'm hurt. Like I'm out for a while. Like you don't get to stop. And that battle could go on for days, or it could go on for hours, and there's no timeout. And spiritually speaking, there's no time out. It's God, I'm here and I need your help. It's getting tough. And I knew you said you'll never leave me. You're not going to forsake me. I'm in this battle. I'm not going to quit. But humanly speaking, I'm not going to make it much longer. I need your help here. And God is there. He will always intervene for us. God never said it would be easy. In fact, he said exactly the opposite. Go to Matthew 7, 13 and 14. When things get tough, some people get discouraged. They go, does God hate me? Why me? Why am I having to go through all this? God says this. He says in Matthew 7:13, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it. He said this way to life that leads to eternal life is a straight, narrow, difficult path. So he didn't promise it easy. I think of Daniel Whitley. He just got baptized when I was down in Houston in the Gulf of Mexico with his wife in January, and now he's got cancer. Like, here we go. We're in the fight. It's going to be a little tough. 2 Timothy 3, verse 12. 2 Timothy 3, verse 12. It says, yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. So don't be shocked. You were already told, I was already told, you will suffer persecution. It's not if or maybe, it's when, because you're going to suffer it. And one of the things that I think all of you have had to do in recent months is stand on your own 2 feet and say, what is right, what is wrong? I'm going to have to do this even if my friends won't talk to me, even if, I have to travel now a long ways to get to church as often as I can. Even if my family starts to reject me or people say negative things, I see right, I see wrong, I have to do the right thing, and now I've got to stand on my own 2 feet, and I've got to work out my own salvation with fear and trembling. God help me to do the right thing. And you know what, people pray, people fast, people say, God, show me. And you know what? He does. And he always will. When things get tough, start fasting. When things get really tough, just get on your knees and pray. If you keep doing that, you will make it to the kingdom. And God will reward you greatly. God never abandons any of us in our time of need, but he'll let us get to the end of the rope sometimes. He will make it a little challenging and difficult. And honestly, if you really think about what he's doing, he's strengthening our character. And that's why the apostle could say, I count it all joy when I fall into these various, trials and temptations and troubles, because I know that God's allowing this to strengthen my character, to make me a better person, to put me in a situation where now I'm strengthening my spiritual muscles, so to speak. Look at Psalm 34:19, because even though God will allow us these challenges, he also says, look, I got a way out of this stuff too. Like, it's not the end of the world. He says in Psalm 34:19, and there's a few verses here in chapter 34 I want to read. He says, many are the afflictions of the righteous. If you're going through hard times and you have afflictions, it's a good sign. Because smooth sailing, you're not building a lot of character. So God goes, no, time's short, time for affliction, time for persecution, time for tribulation. I'm going to up the ante here a little bit. I got to put these people through the paces. We're short on time. The kingdom's coming. Let's see who makes it. Let's see who's committed. Let's see who's in the fight and who's not. It says, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. God says, yeah, I'm here though. I had to test you. I had to push you a little bit, see what you do. Were you willing to put your job on the line, or were you willing to put this relationship on the line to do the right thing? I always tell people that I'm counseling for marriage, if your husband, ma'am, goes off the rail, or if your wife, sir, goes off the rail and leaves the church and goes back to the world, don't follow him. You do the right thing. Put God first, not your husband, not your wife. If you put your husband or wife first, you will have a bad marriage. Put God first, and then your wife or your husband. But God always comes first. He gets first priority. And that's above your parents, your brothers and sisters, your best friends, your husband or wife. And God says, look, trials come. I will help you through that, but put me first. Always put me first. I'm watching. If you go 2 verses back in Psalm 34:17, it says, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears. If you want your prayers answered, obey God. Be a righteous person. Get your act together. You know what you need to do. You probably know what sins you've got to rid from your life. Start working on it. Start making progress. I had a guy that came in the church. I was pastoring up in Minnesota years ago, and this guy came in his 70s. And I went to visit him in his home before he came to church, and it was in December. And I walked into his home, and there's a Christmas tree, and there's gifts, and he's smoking like a chimney, and he'd been smoking in there for decades, man. It was yellow in that room, and it was toxic. I mean, I can tolerate stuff, but it was hard to breathe in there. And he wanted to come to church. He'd learned about the Sabbath. He didn't have a clue about you shouldn't smoke, didn't know anything about the holy days or Christmas, but he was pretty convinced. He'd read the booklet on the Sabbath, and he knew he needed to quit going on Sunday and come on Sabbath. So I'm like, where do I start? I guess I'll start with smoking and Christmas. I'm here, let's talk. So we were there for 3 hours. We had this long talk, and he ended up coming to Sabbath services. And I said, you can't smoke at church, and you need to knock this habit off. And he goes, sir, I've tried, I'll try harder. So he tried everything that they make, the gum, the patch, you name it, he tried it, and he still smelled like a cigarette every week. And I knew he was still smoking. And I said, sir, what's going on here? Like I told you, you got to knock this off. He goes, I'm trying. Like, I don't know. I'm praying. I'm trying. I said, have you fasted? He said, well, no, I haven't done that. I said, I got a cure for you. Every time you light a cigarette and puff on it, you got to fast a day. And he was fasting 3 days a week some weeks. And it took him about a month, and he never smoked another cigarette because he was diligent. He was all in. He was fully committed. And he said, look, everything everybody tried didn't work, but that fasting thing, God, he saw my heart. He saw I was putting the effort in, and it worked. And he never smoked again. About a year after that, he got cancer, and he died shortly thereafter in the faith as a baptized member, but he overcame smoking. And that Christmas tree was gone. After I talked to him, in a week, that was out in the trash. And he changed his life. And I go, what? That's what God's looking for. Repentant heart. Somebody who's all in, that's going to do whatever it takes. We must never forget that God says, look, I'm there to deliver you out of your troubles. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles, it says in verse 17. Another thing we should never forget as Christians in God's church is God says, I'm sending my angels about you. Go back to verse 7, same chapter, Psalm 34:7. The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and delivers him. That's pretty important. Teach your children that. God puts his angels about you. He puts his angels around his people. All around them, you can picture that, right? You might not see them. They're invisible. Now they can manifest themselves, and we can see them, and they'll look like a human. And Hebrews tells us it's possible to entertain an angel unaware, so you didn't even know it was one. And has that ever happened to any of us? Maybe. It could have, and it might yet. But they're there. They have a duty and a job to encamp around us, protect us. Remember that. When things get rough, look, God's angels are here. We're in a pretty good spot right here with God on our side. Let's go to Psalm 91. Psalm 91. There have been a number of people that said this psalm doesn't apply right now. It'll apply when we flee the place of safety, but it doesn't apply now. And I will assure you that it applies in the past, it applies now, and it will apply in the future. It always applies. And there's no Old Testament scripture that we have that says something like this, where we can go, no, that's Old Testament, it doesn't matter. How many Old Testament scriptures are talked about in the New Testament or quoted in the New Testament? Lots, hundreds. The Old Testament matters. The New Testament matters. The Word of God is here. It's a complete picture. You let the Bible interpret itself. In Psalm 91, it says, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That's where you want to be, under the shadow of the Almighty. And I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him I will trust. I have to ask, and you have to ask, do you really trust God? And what's it going to take for you or I to finally really trust God the way we ought to? What else does he have to do? Look he called you out of the world. He called me out of the world. That's huge. You're one of very few people on the planet that understand the truth, that understand God's plan, that have the hope of the resurrection, that know what they're born for and what lies in the future. And you know how to live your life. You don't have to worry about what's right or what's wrong. The Bible tells you what's right or wrong. We live in a world that doesn't know right from wrong. They call evil good, good evil. How many schools and how many businesses promote perverse lifestyles today and think that they're good and we should support it? And that if you don't, you're the hater, you're the bad person. They're calling good evil and evil good. You don't have to be confused. You go, okay, does God approve of homosexuality? Nope. Does God approve of an adultery situation? No. Does God approve of fornication? No. Does God want me to keep the Sabbath? Yes. Black, white, yes, no. I should do this, I shouldn't do that. Thank you, God, I know what to do. You made me. You made the rules to live by. One of the greatest blessings we have is the laws of God, because it shows us how to live and be happy and have a full life, and to have an abundant life, and to have a happy life. And all the richest people in the world, it's not the money and it's not the power that makes you happy, and they all end up finding it out and being empty. And God goes, here's how you be happy. Obey me. Follow these laws. Live this way. And you know what? Your life will be abundant. It'll be full. If you're depressed, you'll stop being depressed, because it's not depressing. It's positive. Start serving and helping other people. Man, you'll come out of that depression. Stop thinking about yourself all the time. Do what God says. Watch your life change. Watch this person begins to grow and blossom. Verse 3, surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. What? God delivers from pestilence too? Yeah, he does. Diseases are curses. God says, if you don't obey me, I'm going to pour out these diseases on you. So if you obey him and he delivers you from the perilous pestilence, he means what he says. That applies. People don't want this to apply because I want to live my life like, kind of a crazy person and try to save myself. And I'm going to tell you, wearing a mask and not singing is not going to do it. God says, I protect you from the perilous pestilence. He shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor of the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor of the destruction that lies waste at noonday. 1,000 will fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Do you believe it? Or is that a nice story? Is that kind of a nice sounding, song? Or do you actually believe what God just said there? Because he meant it. And if you're not totally committed and you're not in this fight, then you will act differently than if you're totally committed and you're all in and you believe what God just said. It says, only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked. Again, this is a curse. This is what the wicked get. This is punishment. Because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your habitation, no evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways, and they will bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the serpent you shall trample underfoot. When Paul went to put wood in the fire, and that serpent, that deadly viper, came out of that fire and latched onto him, and he shook it back off into the fire, he should have died. But God says, no, I got that. And all the people that were thinking, hey, this guy is bad and we need to kill him, all switched their minds real quickly. No, he's a god. He should be dead. How's this guy still standing there after that viper bit him? What about lions? Well, Daniel went in a den of lions. They didn't hurt him. David killed a lion. Samson, man, that was easy for him when God was with him. Verse 14, because he has set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him on high because he has known my name. And he shall call upon me, and I will answer him. And I'll be with him in trouble, and I will deliver him and honor him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. That whole psalm matters as much today as it did yesterday, and it will tomorrow. If you get down, you get depressed, things get tough, read Psalm 91. Read the stories. I want to look at one story today in the sermon, the rest of the sermon. And it's a great story in the Bible. It's actually an epic story, and it's found in 1 Samuel 17. And let's go see what lessons we can learn from this story. In 1 Samuel 17, and many of you already know where we're going. And I want to really spend the rest of the sermon on this, because the things we find in the Bible here are written for our admonition, and these things strengthen our faith. When we look at examples in the Bible of how God delivered, it could be Esther, or it could be Daniel from the den of lions, or in this case, it's David and Goliath we're going to read about. Those things should strengthen our faith because we worship the same God they did. And if he could do it for them, he can do it for us. And he will do it for us if we just trust him. And you don't get to just say you trust him. God will put you in a situation where he's going to see if you trust him. Now I'm going to see if you live your life that way. It's easy to talk about it. But now you're in a spot where you can't really wiggle out of it. Now you're in the fight. Let's see what you do. 1 Samuel 17 and verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies together at Sukkah, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Sukkah and Ezekah in Ephes Dammon." Now, Ephes Dammon means boundary of blood. And the name is given to this region because of the constant border warfare that took place there. This is about 12 or 15 miles kind of southwest of Jerusalem, and about 9 or 10 miles, or that'd be 14 to 16 kilometers from Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was the home of the family of Jesse, who was David's dad. So that's where he grew up, or that's where he came from. And this verse also reminds us, when it says, which belongs to Judah, that the Philistines were encroaching on Judean lands at this point. And if you read the chapter before this, you see that God was beginning to take his blessing away from Saul. And David had been anointed as the next king. He was not yet in that position. Saul was still there. David had to wait some time before God actually gave him the spot as king in that position to replace Saul. But anyway, here we see the Philistines are gathered against the Israelite armies. Verse 2, "And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with a valley in between them." So this story has a really good picture that it's painting here, and you can just see these big armies facing each other, and there's a valley in between. And in that part of the country, though, they usually put crops there. There was a river and some stones down in the middle. But, you could walk out into that field and, you'd see a man standing out there, and here's one army and here's another army over here. And it says the champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, when it says a champion, it literally means, this phrase, one who enters the space between two armies to decide the contest by single combat. So you choose your best man from this army, and you choose your best man from that army. They're going to fight to the death, and whoever's victorious wins the battle, and that's how this battle would be decided. And so we see that Goliath is the champion for the Philistine side of this battle. And it tells us that he was 6 cubits and a span. Now, depending on which commentary you read, Goliath is somewhere between 9 feet 9 inches, which is 3 meters tall, and 11 feet 4 inches, which is 3.45 meters tall. So this dude was a big guy. He was literally a giant. Even if we go with the shorter height of 9 feet 9, a basketball goal is at 10 feet. I mean, his head almost hit it, or did hit it. That's a big guy. And the way they got a cubit was really the distance from your elbow, and if you held your arm out to the extremity of this finger. So you would measure from this finger to your elbow, and that was a cubit. And it says a span, so the cubit was 18 to 21 inches. We're not sure, but at 18 inches, that's 3 meters or 9 feet 9 inches tall. And a span is the distance between an outstretched hand from the tip of this finger and the tip of the thumb, which is half of a cubit. So if you're doing this and you go 1, 2, I'm back to my elbow. So this is a span, so half a cubit, and it tells us 6 cubits and a span. So needless to say, the picture is painted. This is a big, big guy. And if we read what happened in Joshua's time, Joshua had eliminated many of the giants. But there were a few places, there remained 3 places where the giants still lived. And one of those was Gath. Let's go to Joshua 11. We'll come back to this story. But Joshua 11, verse 21. And we'll also read verse 22. Joshua 11, verse 21. And at that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities, and none of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. So he had eliminated a bunch of them, and the destruction of the Anakim from the hill country was very significant because they had this fearsome presence. And if you recall back in Numbers 13 and 14, the Israelites had rebelled against God's command to go into the promised land because of these giants and these fortified cities. And under Joshua's leadership, they learned that their size didn't matter. If God was on their side, these guys were bred for the Israelites. They could win the battle and they could take these guys out. And Joshua was a highly respected and fierce warrior. And God used him to conquer a lot of lands and take out a lot of giants. Now, when we talk about Daniel, I want to go back to something here. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 16 and look at verse 18, because there's a little history here. 1 Samuel 16, verse 18, it says, one of the servants is answering Saul here. Look, I have seen a son of Jesse and a Bethlehemite who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. So David is described, and not a lot of times these characters in the Bible are not described, but David was described as a handsome person, and also a man of skill when it came to playing instruments, and a mighty man of valor, and most importantly, and the Lord is with him. The Lord had departed from Saul, but he was with David. And if you look at Saul in his early days, go back to 1 Samuel 9, verses 1 and 2. It says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Becherath, the son of Apha, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power, and he had a son whose name was Saul. So Kish had a son, he's a Benjamite, Saul's a Benjamite, and notice the description of Saul, a choice and handsome young man. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel, and from his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the people. So Saul was a big dude too. And he stood head and shoulders above everybody in a crowd, and he was handsome. I mean, this guy had everything going for him. But we see that Saul didn't do what God told him to do, and that God says, look, I'm rejecting you as king. And once God began to withdraw his, protection and blessing on Saul, things went badly, and David became anointed as the next king. So let's go back to the story here and pick it up in verse 5, 1 Samuel 17, verse 5. Talking about this champion, Goliath of Gath. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. So he had a bronze helmet. Most of the people in the army had leather helmets, but this guy had a bronze helmet. And he also had a coat of mail, and the more accurate description here in the original language says clothed with scaled body armor. So what they did is they took copper and they fashioned it like overlapping plates of scales on a fish, and that was the armor. So it made it hard for a sword to penetrate that, or an arrow might be slowed down or whatever. So he had that on his helmet. He had a coat of mail, and that armor went down almost to the knees. So it covered most of the vital parts of the body. The arms were in the open so they could be used to fight, but the key parts of the body were protected by it. And it was 5,000 shekels of bronze, this coat of mail. Again, look at the sources. They vary greatly. Some sources claim it's 157 pounds, that coat of mail, but most put it at about 125 pounds. And that's not counting the helmet or the weapons or what he had on his legs, which we're about to read about. And he had graves. He had bronze graves on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. So he had these bronze graves on his legs that would go from the thigh all the way down to the heels to protect from swords and arrows and spears and all the other things. And then he had this oversized javelin, which is designed for hurtling, and it strapped between. It was on his back between his shoulders, so he could grab it and pull it out and use that if he needed it. It says, now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. So it's big around. If you've ever seen a weaver's beam and been to a museum, it's a big chunk of wood. And that's the way the shaft of the spear was. And his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. So that the tip of the spear was about 17 pounds or 7.7 kilograms. If any of you have been bowling, the heaviest bowling balls are 16 pounds. Put that on a weaver's beam and see how far you throw it, right? Most people would just fall right down there. And he used that as a weapon of war, and he could throw it as far as he needed to throw it accurately. So it tells you he wasn't just big, this guy was strong. He was a mighty, powerful individual, and he was truly a giant. And he also had a shield bearer that went before him, and there are two different Hebrew words for shield in this Old Testament. One refers to a small round shield that they wore on their left arm, and the other one refers to, the one referred to here, it refers to a much larger oblong shield, and it was often carried by a shield bearer. It was a soldier who moved into battle ahead of Goliath, who was a war machine, it really. And so he's got the armor bearer with the big shield, all this armor on. You can kind of get the picture. The Bible describes it quite well. Verse 8, and then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. So Goliath is taunting the soldiers of Israel. And, he said, well, none of the famous warriors from Saul dare to challenge me, is basically what he's saying. And as the account later shows in verse 26 and 36, these taunts were as much against God as they were against the army of Saul. Verse 9, it says, if he's able to fight with me and kill me, Goliath says, we will be your servants, but if I prevail against him and kill him, then you'll be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. So here's Goliath in a loud and boastful voice out there calling out any takers. And you can kind of picture what he did here. And I'm sure he had a big booming voice. It says, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So he had a reputation for incredible physical strength and heroism, and his formidable appearance was also there. And there wasn't anybody in the Israelite army that was willing to challenge this guy. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. And the man was old and advanced in years in the days of Saul. So here we see that David's dad, Jesse, had 8 sons. David's the young one, and it says in verse 13, the 3 oldest of Jesse had gone to follow Saul into the battle, and the names of the 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. So these were also tough guys. These were, men who became legendary warriors as well. And so David grew up in a family where, you better be tough or you're not going to survive, because, that's what he grew up in. These guys were all mighty men here. Verse 14, David was the youngest, and the oldest, the 3 oldest followed Saul. And David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem, and the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. So here we are, day after day, morning and evening. He's taunting him. He's, calling him names. He's putting the true God down. He's elevating his own gods and, just mocking the Israelites. Verse 17, then Jesse said to his son David, take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news to me of them. So in ancient times, we see that the soldiers usually lived off the land that they conquered, or they depended on personal supplies that either they or someone else brought to them from home. And so Jesse sent David, take the grain, the loaves, the cheeses, go give it to my oldest boys and to their officers. Verse 19, now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. And, David and his brothers were brave guys. David couldn't wait to get there and bring the supplies and get in the fight. Verse 23, and as he talked with them, there was a champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words, and so David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel, and it shall be that the man who kills him the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption in Israel. So Saul promised 3 things for anybody who would challenge this giant, right, and kill him. Number 1, I'm going to enrich you. I'm going to give you riches. Number 2, you get exemption from taxes and public service duty for the father's house, like the whole family. And you get my daughter's hand in marriage if you can defeat Goliath. Verse 26, then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistines and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David here is filled with zeal for God. And he couldn't stand the fact that this Philistine, this uncircumcised and profane man, this pagan, was defying the living God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and his army. Something had to be done. Somebody had to put an end to this, and David was prepared to be that person. Verse 27, and the people answered him in the same manner, saying, so it shall be done for the man who kills him. So they rehearsed this. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, when he heard this, he spoke to what he spoke to the men. Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Now, there's probably years between the oldest son and David. There are 8 brothers. Eliab is jealous, and he's imputing motives here to David that, frankly, are not true. And he's imputing that, number 1, you're neglecting your duty. Number 2, you're an arrogant, vain person, David, and you just want to see bloodshed. Now, none of that was true. David, really, what he was about to do had nothing to do with pride or arrogance, as we read the story. It did not have to do with vainglory. It wasn't about David making David famous. He was standing up for the truth. He was standing up for the true God. He wasn't going to let this happen while he was there. And sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you need to take a stand, and you need to stand up for the truth. And you need to speak up. You need to do something about it. One of the things I've learned in my life, especially in my position as a minister, is if I'm in a group of people and somebody's off the rails on some topic and I don't say something, they assume I agree. And they go, he was standing there, he must have agreed with my crazy idea. They don't say crazy idea, but I didn't say anything. And so I've learned, I can't walk away from there without saying something. Now, I'm not going to be rude. I'm not going to try to hurt feelings, but that's not okay, and it's not what I believe, and I don't think that's right. And it's okay for you to do that. You look at the world around us, and if you're a really crazy person and you're involved in the gay, lesbian, transgender movement, or you're some political nut job, they can be as loud and obnoxious and in your face as they want to be, and nobody says anything, lets it go. But a person who's actually balanced and has a sound mind speaks up, and you're a hateful person, how dare you say that? Hey, get in the fight. Somebody's got to say it, and it needs to be us. Don't let stuff go all the time. You have to you deny God in those situations. It's like you could have said something. You were right there. If it's a brother or sister in Christ, you have a duty to say something. Do you not want them in the kingdom? If they're getting wrong ideas and going in a wrong direction, speak up. Say, look, I respect you, I love you, but that isn't right. The Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says this. I disagree with you. Oh, well, you know what? They might not tell 10 more people the same thing. They actually might go, well, I guess it is in the Bible. Maybe I am wrong. Or they might just totally oust you and out you and totally disagree with you, but at least you said something. And I think that's our duty. And when you don't do it and you're there, most of the time you'll go home and go, I wish I'd said something. Wish I'd spoken up. I had the opportunity. God put me in that conversation, especially with other church people. Look, if we're all going to speak the same thing, then we need to, instead of harbor grudges and not saying anything, speak up. I love you. That's why I'm saying something to you. But no, that's not right. And if I'm wrong, which people will find errors with me, I'm a human being too. Sometimes I'm going to have to eat it and say, you know what, you're right. I guess I was wrong. I'm sorry. I won't do that again. Or I won't say that again. We all have to be big enough to admit mistakes. But here's David. He's going, look, something's got to be done. Nobody's doing anything. I'll do it. I'll take this guy on. I mean, he's against God. This isn't okay. Verse 29, and so his brother goes and says, hey, he imputes these motives, and David says, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? So David protests his innocence. He says, look, what have I done? Can I ask a harmless question? That's all I ask. Why are you mad at me? And so, regardless of what his older brother said, David was not deterred from doing the right thing. That didn't rock him. That didn't take him off the path or cause him to, oh, you're right, older brother, I'm going home now. He pursued the goal, and he did what he knew he had to do. Verse 30, he turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. And when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul and sent for him. So, of course, there are people standing around, hey, run to Saul and tell him this guy's going to take on Goliath. And it says in verse 32, verse 31, and when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now, it had to be a shepherd here that had more courage than anybody in this army. And David knew it was really an opportunity for God to display his power, and he knew that God was with him. And we see in 1 Samuel 16:18, we already read that look, they recognize that the Lord is with him. God's blessing this guy. He's with him. And David knew that. In verse 33, Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. Now, David was likely in his late teens, not more than 20 years of age when he fought Goliath. And young people in the church need to realize God's worked with some pretty young people before in really big ways. And he's working with you, not just the old people like us. He works with young people. You can do some pretty mighty things, and God will use you to do mighty things in the days ahead if you submit to him, if you're all in, and if you're willing to get in the fight like David was. And it's a spiritual battle that we're in, but somebody's got to get in there and accomplish what needs accomplishing. And humanly speaking, we see here's Goliath. He's an expert in the ways of war. He's highly trained. He's experienced. He's massive. He's armed. And here's David, right, with a slingshot. And he's just a kid. And there's really no way that David should be able to win this battle. It doesn't make sense. People have accused me of having dangerous faith. I go, I don't even know what that is. I thought faith was faith, like you trust God. What do you mean dangerous? Was this dangerous faith? Was David, when he opened his windows like he always did and prayed to his God, because you know what? You're not going to stop me from worshiping God the way I've always worshiped God. You can't bully me into stop doing that. He didn't go quietly in his closet. He opened the windows like he always did, and he prayed. And I go, man, that guy had some character. Nobody could stop him from doing the right thing. And we read the miracle that God performed because of it. Had he not done it, we wouldn't read that story. If David had not said, you know what, I'm going to do this, and follow through with it, we wouldn't read the story. It wouldn't be in here. Or it'd be a tragic story, not a happy story. Verse 34, David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Well, first of all, a lion and a bear, neither one of them have a beard. Most of you have been to zoos. You see a lion, you see a bear. The word for beard here literally means the lower jaw or the throat, that part of the animal. And back in the days of Saul, the country was pretty densely wooded yet. It hadn't been cleared like it is today. And the lion and the bear were pretty common in Palestine in those days. And we see that bears descended from Lebanon and the lions came usually from Judah. And when you look at history, the Syrian bear is said to be especially ferocious. And it was more dreaded than the lion was. And so if you were a shepherd, these are your foes, the lion and the bear. These are the things that you hope you don't have to deal with. But if you look in history, there were other shepherds who would fight off lions and bears with a shepherd's, staff and primitive weapons. It's like those guys didn't want those wild animals getting those sheep. And David, as a young man, had learned to be courageous like that and do those things. And he rehearsed that here before Saul to say, hey, man, I can do this. God's delivered me already a couple times. He'll do it here. And that was the key. Verse 37, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. David knew, I'm on. This is a bad idea. But God's with me, and I know he's with me, and I know this is the right thing to do, and somebody's got to stop this loudmouth, uncircumcised Philistine from defying God and his army. And that was really the basis for David's confidence and success, is because he knew where his deliverance came from. And anytime we think we can do it on our own, God says, go for it. I can't wait to see this. And it goes badly. But when we know it's God who's for us, because God, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do what you want us to do. This isn't something we're coming up with. This is what we've always done. We're just trying to do it. Then you know God's for you. You can have some confidence. If you're living a righteous life, and none of us do that perfectly, you can pray to God knowing he will answer your prayer, because he says, I hear the prayers of the righteous. Does he mean it or doesn't he mean it? Is he going to hear him or is he not going to hear him? Well, you be righteous. That's a prerequisite. So if you have some hidden sins and you know that you have these hidden sins and you're not overcoming them and you're not making progress, how much faith do you have in a prayer to God saying, God, help me, when you know, God, I'm doing everything wrong and you know it and I know it. Help me anyway. God's going to go, no, get your act together. You got to repent of those things, and then watch, I'll jump in here and help you. But let's get rid of that. It's not going to be good for your character if I help you right now. So, fix that. We see many instances, leave your gift, go make amends with your brother, and then come and offer it to me, God says. Go fix that first. And it's the same thing in our lives. Go fix those things, and then you have confidence. to come before God and ask what you request and know that he will come through. And it's usually not when we want it to happen and how we want it to happen, but God does it, and it's usually 10 times better than the way we thought it should happen. So we don't put God in a box and tell him how to do it. We say, God, I need help here. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I need it. And he will intervene. He has over and over and over again. We have tons of examples and stories, and this one's a powerful one. And verse 38, so Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head, and he also clothed him with a coat of mail. And David fastened his sword to his armor, and he tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I can't even walk in these. I've not tested them. So David took them off. And then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now, he chose 5. Some people say, well, Goliath had brothers. He needed a stone for each. Other people say, well, if he missed, he had extra ammunition. I know if I'm going against Goliath, I'm probably going to take more than 1 smooth stone. God, you're going to help me, but I'm going to have all the ammo I need, and I'm going to do everything I can here. But either way, they were smooth stones. Anybody who has a sling knows, look, you get some oblong stone, it'll fly crooked, right? You want to get a smooth, round stone. These stones that they use when you look at archaeology were the size between a golf ball and a baseball. Like, they were pretty good sized stones. And a guy who was really good, a good slinger, they used to call him, could hurl a stone as accurately and as far as an archer. And archers back then are shooting targets at 200 yards. So a guy who's good with a sling can get it out there. They said the expert slingers were known to have hurled their projectiles as far as 440 yards, 400 meters. That's a quarter of a mile. And an expert with a sling could sling a stone at speeds up to and exceeding 100 miles an hour. So the fastest pitchers in baseball, they're throwing a stone, but they got a sling, which gives them an advantage for speed. That's 160 kilometers an hour if you're in London today and listening in, or Canada. So it gives you kind of an idea. And honestly, one of the things that we may not know is, go to Judges 16:20. Keep your place here. Slingers were part of the military, part of the army back then. We think of archers, we think of guys with swords, people in chariots at different time. But notice here, it says in verse 16, it says, among all this people there were 700 select men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. So they got really good with these slings. And that was part of, these Benjamites were some pretty tough guys, and that was part of their force, were slingers. And in this case, select left-handed slingers. So this was common back then. That sling was something the shepherds could use along with their staff, and people could get pretty deadly and pretty accurate with a slingshot. Okay, verse 40. It says, then he took a staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Like, this is the best you guys got? Like, this is I have no respect for you guys. This is ridiculous. You send out a kid here. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And then David, who is zealous for God, said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. This day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. The battle is the Lord's. David understood that. We have to understand that. When we get in these battles, and it can be with our health, it can be with our family, it can be church, it can be whatever, the battle is the Lord's. And David understood that. David knew that the outcome was determined by God, the eternal. And the same is true for us today. Who can be against us? If God's for us, who can be against us, right? Romans 8:31. Verse 48, and so it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet him. And it says, and David met the Philistine. So he didn't just hang out or kind of hide behind something. He charged into battle. I mean, here comes the Philistine, here comes David. And David runs to confront this guy. He hasted to meet him. And at this point, there was no turning back, right? David had just burned the ships behind him, right? Number one, he kind of burned it a while back because his pride and his honor were on the line when he said, I'm going to do this. And he came before Saul, and I got it, and let me go. Kind of hard to turn back from that. But at this point, too late. No matter what, you've burned the ships. There's no escape. You're in the battle now. And sometimes God allows that to happen to us. He burns the ships. There is no way out. There's no way to escape this at this point. He'd come to a point of no return. Maybe I can explain it this way too. A point of no return is the point at which one must continue on the current course of action because turning back is either dangerous, it's physically impossible, it's difficult, or it might be prohibitively expensive. And so you reach this point where, hey, no point of no return. I'm in now. I made the commitment. I can't turn back. It really originated as a technical term in air navigation for a plane that took off in flight, and when it got to a point where it was no longer capable of getting back to the ship or back to the airstrip, it had crossed the point of no return. Like they're going to run out of fuel, they're going to crash and burn. Or it could also mean a plane that's taking off on the airfield and it gets to a certain point and a certain speed where they're not going to be able to stop before the end of the airstrip. So it's either keep the hammer down and hope you clear the trees and get off that runway, or you're going to crash and burn. You've reached a point of no return. There's just no turning back. And you may have heard the term cross the line in the sand, right? You draw a line in the sand, you step across the line, now it's you cross the line, we're all in. Or burn the ship. So whatever you want to say, David reached that point, and God wants us to look, I called you out of the world. I've given you the knowledge of the truth. I've opened your mind. Burn the ships. Don't go back there. If you do, you're not fit for the kingdom. You're not going to make it. So we're in. We're all in now. We made the commitment. It's time to get in the fight like David did. And notice verse 49. David put his hand in the bag, took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead so that the stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. I mean, what a victory. What a great story. You know, it's a story we want to teach our children, but it's also a story we shouldn't forget. And David's commitment, his attitude of, look, this is my God. You don't get to talk about my God that way. You don't get to act this way to his army. This is his army. This is God's army. How dare you defy it? You know, and that's where we're at in the church. That's where we're at this time of the end of the age is we've got to be totally committed. There's no going back right now. We're past that. That time has come and gone. We're here. Let's go. Time is short. And as challenges come up, and they're going to get harder, this isn't that hard yet. And we all know it. I mean, right now, it's you know, for some people, they go to a store and the pressure with a mask or the pressure for this, that, or the other thing can be pretty immense on certain people. Pressure, get used to it, man. That's part of life. There are a lot of pressures in life. A lot of pressures from family. There's a lot of pressures from society around us. Don't cave to that pressure. Don't go along with what's wrong. Don't succumb to pressure. Don't compromise your values ever. And if you're in the fight, you might as well be all in. You might as well be David. You might as well be zealous. You might as well go all the way. Produce 100-fold, not just 30. That's not good enough. Let's go for 100. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. Let's do it all the way. And if you think that way and you act that way, I assure you, you will end up in the kingdom when it's all said and done. God will get you there. He will direct you, guide you, help you, show you the way. If you live in fear, not going to make it. God said, I didn't give you a spirit of fear, right? 2 Timothy 1:7, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Proverbs 28:1, the righteous are as bold as a lion. What? You better be bold like a lion, man. Don't be a timid, afraid, pressured person. Oh, I don't know. What are they going to think? What are they going to say? Who cares? This is temporary. This is a proving ground. This is for real. This is big stuff. Young people, don't compromise with right and wrong. Do the right thing. Be blessed for it. You'll have plenty of pressures. My kids all went through public school, and when you're little, it's, the early grades, it's Halloween comes, and you're not doing the Halloween parade with everybody else. You're down at the library, or you're sitting off in the corner doing some assignment. You're not doing the Christmas art. Your art's not on the wall with everybody else's because you're not doing Santa Claus and all that. You get a little older, and now the peer pressure starts to kick in. God goes, okay, you're a little older, you're a little more mature, you passed the little test. Now I'm going to give you a little harder test. Let's see how you do with your friends in school, and now you're the odd one out. And, hey, we need you on this wrestling team. We've got a big match, man. You can't abandon us. We're your teammates. Well, no, God comes first. I can't wrestle. It's on the Sabbath. Or I can't run in that track meet, or I can't, play in that music recital, or I can't be in that drama production because it's the Sabbath. I can't go to work. I know I'm scheduled on that shift, but like I told you, I can't do that shift. If you don't come, you're fired. Okay, well, I guess you'll fire me. And I've had that happen to me. I worked in a cabinet shop once, and the boss told me, we're all working Saturday, no exceptions. And I said, well, when I hired on, I told you I wouldn't be here on Saturday. I won't be here. Don't come here Monday then. Get your stuff and go home. I showed up Monday. I just got in, sat in my chair like I always do, and he was mad. He wouldn't talk to me for 2 weeks, but guess what? He didn't fire me. And when I finally quit and went into ministry, he didn't want me to quit and go in ministry. He wanted me to stay there. Always do what's right. Let's finish here with Philippians 3. Philippians 3. And I don't have a clock. I don't have a clue what time it is, so I think we're getting close. We'll just wrap it up here. Philippians 3, verse 13. Paul writes here, he says, brethren, I do not count myself to apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And that's where we're at, people. Put it behind us. Move forward. Don't let guilt destroy you either. A lot of us have said and done things that we wish we hadn't said and done. Probably all of us. Hopefully we've done what we can to patch those, relationships up and mend those bridges. Sometimes you can't. They're dead. You can't do anything now. They're not here to patch it up with. But you know what? Learn to let that go in the past. Paul had to let a lot of things go in his past. He was persecuting and responsible for the death of Christians before God called him. It was painful for Paul to look back, but he had to realize, look, God called me out of that. I thought I was doing God a service. Now I realize I wasn't. And God let Paul go through some really hard things. And I'm sure Paul did it gladly, knowing, look, man, I was the guy doing that to others. Now I'm having to experience it. I'm glad to have to take my share of the beatings here because I dished them out. And all of us, I think that keeps us humble. We look back, oh, yeah, could have done better. Wish I hadn't done that. Wish I didn't say that. But once you ask God to forgive you, he forgives you. He said, let it go. Move on. Don't let it drag you down. You got a job to do now. Get going. Get it done. Get in a fight. Finally, you're getting it. I'm happy. There's angels rejoicing in heaven. You just repented. Walter Cronkite once said, I can't imagine a person becoming a success who doesn't give this game of life everything he's got. And I would say, spiritually speaking, the same thing is true. There is no turning back once we commit to God and his way of life. We have to move forward. This is a life and death struggle. We can't forget that the battle is the Lord's. God's on our side, and with God on our side, we can slay the giants. Let's burn the ships, and let's get in the fight.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2021, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.